All right, thank you all for coming. I know it's been a long, very intense day, and we're all a little bit tired, so I'm going to warm you all up for this, so we're not fall asleep by factoring some polynomials, because I'm a mathematician, and I think it'll wake everyone up. No, seriously, so I'm going to talk about, I don't know if this sort of fits, this less directly domains-related stuff, has a lot to do with some of the justice and surveillance things that some people have been talking about on and off today. I think I do have, there's been a little bit of interesting discussion about whether you use the tools of the oppressor to break the oppression or not. And I think I'm coming down very hard in this talk about learning the tools of the oppressor to be able to fight against this oppression. Maybe that's a mistake, but that's what I'm doing. So I'm just, let's see. So just kind of a theme, and to connect this to open and independent ed tech. So my kind of Twitter version of sort of the point of the big philosophy here is that ed tech, which does not center on the autonomy agents of student and instructor, is only a tool to turn us into better and more docile factory robots and consumers. So this is that famous thing. I think Rajiv Jangiani uses this a lot. This is this like 100-year-old thing about the way education will be into the year 2000. And this 100 years ago, vision of that was you just like turn a crank and things go into students' heads. This is one of the very few images of Charlie Chaplin that's in the public domain, at least in the United States. This I couldn't find a good. I wanted some image associated with the clashes. I'm all lost in the supermarket, but I couldn't find one. Anyway, so that's kind of my general position, and so we want to have this agency and autonomy enabling ed tech. The kind of things we do in this are much more digital literacy education, using tools like Hypothesis to shape the web, and of course the domains kind of practice. So, but I think the web is actually a pretty grim place at the moment, particularly for people, who don't have power and privilege. So it seems to me that my point I want to make, and I did this. I was at Domains 2 years ago, and I did talk about security, knowing more about security and privacy. This is another in that same theme. So. My assertion is that giving students and instructors autonomy agency on the World Wide Web without some knowledge of security and privacy is kind of like putting a new driver in a car with the key and saying, give them a map and saying, go for it, but don't tell them to use seatbelts. I mean, security and privacy technology is sort of the only thing we have at all like seatbelts. So maybe we want to just burn the whole system down and not participate in our own oppression. But as we're going to participating to this extent, we should know the tools. So this is my hobby horse, and I'm going to intend to ride it. And so the discussion about blockchain is a case of technology. There's a certain amount of heavy technology here, people are going to get scared at a certain point, but it's going to be good. Don't worry. And I just wanted this is a case where we're learning something about this. So worldwide introduction to blockchain. So blockchain came into people's consciousness because of a thing called Bitcoin. Bitcoin came around in 2009. This pseudonymous guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, posted this paper on a crypto mailing list, and he or she also posted source code for a sort of reference implementation of this new protocol. It was kind of electronic cash. Now, all of the really high caliber professional cryptographers in the world said, shit, for 15, 20 years, we've been doing really sophisticated, really smart electronic cash. This is a bullshit new thing, and they just ignored it. There was a mistake, because somehow they hit fertile ground and it sort of took off. As examples of how Bitcoin, as people, there are trillions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in circulation right now. This is a map of the graph of the value of one Bitcoin. That's this B with the slashes in the US dollars. It hit it's coming down more recently, but I was teaching a course on Bitcoin around this time, and if I bought a fraction of Bitcoin at the beginning I was going to buy one, and then I was going to show my students, this is how you buy a soda with your Bitcoin. Apparently there's a soda machine at MIT where you can buy sodas with Bitcoin. I was going to show them how to do these transactions, and I didn't get around to doing it. And that period of time where I didn't get around to doing it, the price of Bitcoin more than doubled, so I didn't do it. Interestingly enough, there is the Zug Valley near Zurich in Switzerland has decided to sell itself as the Crypto Valley. So it's like Silicon Valley's Crypto Valley, and there's a huge amount of fintech, financial technology based in that area. So it's got a lot of interest, lots of money in this area, multi-million-dollar institutes starting around at various institutions. The European Union government is behind doing a lot of things. My state of Colorado, the previous governor had a blockchain council he appointed. And it seems to have struck some sort of weird chord. There's a little bit of a fly in the ointment here, or rather a few megatons of CO2 in the ointment. So this is a graph of how Bitcoin energy consumption. And it turns out that at the moment, the total power consumption for mining Bitcoins on planet Earth is about the same as the power consumption of the country of Austria. Which is terrifying. Right? Austria is a pretty big industrialized country, a pretty big economy. So there's something weird happening here that we're spending all that money for what? For a few people to buy sodas at MIT? Maybe for people to buy drugs and weapons on the dark web. Anyway, so I want to spend now a few minutes, the middle third of this talk, talking about how blockchains work. So this is the point. So it gets, so there's sort of, my assertion here is that, it's a little bit scary, but so is driving down the highway. I mean, come on, your attention, strays for a few seconds, you're dead, and other people are dead. For fuck's sake, pay attention for 10 minutes, and you'll get some knowledge that might be useful. I mean, not as useful as preventing death on the highway, but that might be useful in discussions with your colleagues. So the claim is that Bitcoin is built, blockchains are built out of sort of three pieces. I'm going to talk about the technicalities of these pieces. They're digital signatures, something called a cryptographic hash function, and a distributed consensus protocol. These are terms of art, right? Every discipline has terms of art. Changing the oil in your car has terms of art, right? So it's just terms. I'm going to talk about what those things mean. Kind of effectively, what those three things are is a digital signature is kind of a very distinctive personal style for digital files, and a hash function is kind of a blender that grinds up files and produces little summaries of them. And a distributed consensus protocol is a way of making decisions in groups, also on the network. Okay, so this is crypto, and crypto is fairly. The reason I think people don't like thinking about crypto, everyone seems to, Jim Groom was saying, make all these modest statements about how technically unsophisticated. He's a very technically sophisticated guy. He said, I don't understand. Come on, Jim, damn it. And I think the reason people are intimidated with it is it's kind of mathy, right? And people find mathematics. I'm a mathematician. We have convinced people that we have some sacred truths, and we use lots of Greek letters to prove that. And I mean, it's all bullshit. It's just, so the good news is that there are lots of free resources. I wrote a free textbook which has a long section about crypto. It's on my website. Ed Felton, who is Obama's deputy chief technology officer, wrote a 4-page thing intended for Congress folks. If congressional representatives can understand it, then academics can, for God's sake. So, all right. So let me just quickly tell you some ideas, some terminology from crypto. In crypto, whenever we talk about crypto, we talk about there's always this sort of story about Alice and Bob. And Alice and Bob are trying desperately to communicate, and there's this Eve who's eavesdropping, who's listening to everything that goes between Alice and Bob is being listened to by the eavesdropper. That pun only works in English, but for some reason, Alice, Bob, and Eve even occur in crypto papers in other languages. Okay, so why do we have this idea that Eve can hear everything? And this is the thing I talk to my students about. The fact of the matter is the internet is like when you send your love letters to your partner across the internet, it's like writing them on a postcard and handing them to a guy at a bus station and say, can you take it closer to where my partner lives? Right? I mean, everything on the internet is wide open unless you've encrypted it with end-to-end encryption. Anyway, so here's some terminology that we use in cryptography. We have, so Alice and Bob want to communicate with each other. So the term is plain text or clear text and a message, and you want to encrypt the message to some other thing called the ciphertext, which is gibberish. So if Eve sees it as it goes by, then she doesn't understand what the secret was that Alice is trying to send to Bob. Bob receives it, and then he has to run it through some other process to descramble it, and he gets the plain text back. So here's the way it typically worked for a long time. Lots of symbols here, and then people getting scared of the mathiness. But so the idea is Alice and Bob, in some sort of pre-lapsarian moment, get together and they share a secret called the key. It's kind of like a password. They share a secret. And then whenever Alice wants to send Bob a message, she takes the message she wants to send, she plugs into some complex algorithm using the key and the message. It produces some ciphertext, this scrambled thing. She sends it over the network, which Eve might see. Bob gets it, he plugs it into the decryption algorithm using the same key, which they shared before they ever separated in those specific ways. and he gets back. And they kind of have this communication back and forth. So this whole thing is predicated upon them sharing that secret. Right? Well, you know that you had this experience all the time. You log into your computer. It knows your password because you sat there and you said, this is what my password is going to be. You had that secret moment with your computer, the way Alice and Bob had this secret moment at the beginning. So the question is, how the hell is this going to work in the modern day when you want to communicate with people like Jeff Bezos and you want to send him your credit card number so you can buy that new bestseller on Amazon? You've never met Jeff. I hope I will never meet Jeff. But I want to have a secret with him. So the thing you do, I'm sorry, before I get to the other fancy modern crypto, so a few things to point out about this. This is called symmetric or private key, secret key cryptography because it's symmetric. You use the same key. They both have to share, that there's a certain symmetry between both ends. They have to share the same key. It's kind of a black art. So if you look at the algorithms, they kind of move the bits around, they fiddle with them, they put in a few bits from the key, they take out some other, it's kind of crazy. There's very little mathematics in symmetric crypto. We have lots and lots of experience about what works and what doesn't work, and every once in a while someone changes an algorithm because there's some algorithm, you could now break what was really cutting edge of crypto, the Enigma machine during the Second World War. You could break it on your cell phone, right? So as technology gets better and we have some insight in certain kinds of structures of mixing bits in certain ways, we know how to attack. So, but there aren't any theorems that say this will always protect your data. It's not a mathematical fact. It's kind of a human fact that smart people have thought about this for a long time and they don't know how to break it. For what that's worth. Okay. Now we're back to talking to Jeff Bezos. So here's this really cool thing. This was discovered in the open community in the late 1970s, and it turned out it had been discovered in the GCHQ and the NSA about 10 years before, but they kept it secret from the rest of the world. It's a thing called public key cryptography, where there are now two keys. So Alice and Bob, what they do, Bob makes a key for decryption and a key for encryption. They're separate keys. And he publishes on his webpage his key for encryption. And this is very different from the previous thing with the symmetric one where you keep your key as secret as you can. Now you publish that key, but only one of the two. The secret one you keep secret. It's called, there's the secret key and the public key. You publish the public one, you keep the secret one secret. And then anyone on the planet who wants to send, anyone on the planet who wants to send you a message takes your public encryption key off your webpage. They use a public algorithm that uses that encryption, that key and the message, and scrambles it. But the weird thing about the way this works, and this is very highly mathematical, so it makes people like me very, very happy, is it goes forward. It's very hard to go backwards. We know there's a way to go back, but it's very hard to go backwards. It's like multiplication. You could multiply, if you had enough patience, you could multiply 300-digit numbers. You'd write it all out, you'd do that thing we learned in elementary school, and you'd do it. If I gave you a 600-digit number and said factor it into two 300-digit numbers, it would take you the lifetime of the universe to try to guess those numbers, even with a supercomputer. So some things are easy one way and hard the other. That's what makes asymmetric. And so now if I have a copy of Jeff Bezos's public key, I can use it to encrypt my credit card number when I send it to Amazon. Even the gibberish through the network, anyone else could have encrypted too, but they don't know what I used to encrypt. They don't know what I was encrypting. They know what the public key is, they know what the algorithm is, but they can't undo that. And so I'm safe sending my credit card number to Jeff Bezos. So this is what makes the modern internet work. You have to be a little bit careful because suppose Alice not only is watching everything going by, but suppose she controls some servers in between me and Jeff. And when I go to Jeff's website and say, hey, tell me your public key, Jeff, so I can send you my credit card number, Alice intercepts the communication. She takes out his key and she puts in her public key. I think that's Jeff's public key. I use that to encrypt my credit card number. It goes to Alice. She decrypts it because she's got the secret key associated with that. She copies out my credit card. Then she wraps it, she encrypts it with Jeff's one and sends it to Jeff. She's a man in the middle. It's a gendered term, but this is called the man in the middle attack. So how do you prevent the man in the middle? It's sort of, this man in the middle attack doesn't happen with old-fashioned symmetric crypto because I met you and we exchanged our private key. We were face to face. I know you. I mean, I'm not going to be, someone else is going to say, I'm Laura. I know you, and so I know it's your key, right? But I've never met Jeff, so I don't know when I see it on a website, So what you need is what's called a PKI, a public key infrastructure. You need some way of associating public keys with real-world humans. If we had a robust PKI, I could trust that that was actually just public key on the Amazon website. There's a whole, there are things people try, anyway, so so here's one last thing to get back to, when we get to blockchain digital signatures. So it turns out we have this method of asymmetric crypto. I think people are mostly with me so far on asymmetric crypto. The asymmetric crypto you can use to make a digital signature. What you do is, suppose I'm Bob and I want to sign something. So what I do is I take the message I want to sign and I decrypt that message. That's ridiculous. It's supposed to decrypt the scrambled things. It's not a scrambled thing. But I take the clear text, I decrypt it. It produces something weirdly scrambled. Now, anyone on the planet can take my decrypted weirdo thing and encrypt it, because everyone can encrypt with my public key. So anyone can take my decrypted message, encrypt it again, and what they should get back is the message. That's because decryption and encryption undo each other. So if I decrypt it first, it produces a weird kind of gibberish which anyone can turn back into the original thing. But that only works if I had the actual real decryption. So when I publish something and I put out the message on my website and this weird bit of gibberish sitting next to it, which is the decrypted version of that clear text already, anyone can check by encrypting that weird gibberish and checking that they're equal to the message. And that's a proof that I'm the one who owns that secret key. So that's the way digital signatures work. So they're enabled by this idea of asymmetric encryption. So that's how I can prove, well, not that I'm me, but I can prove that I have a copy of that secret key. That's what this proves. Okay, so all right, that was too mathy. Let me just point out. So people, there's my stuff about driving on the highway. You have disciplinary expertise here. I want people to at least think critically about privacy and security and cryptology. You don't have to think about the details of them. I'm a mathematician. I don't think about the details of those things very often. I think of them as black boxes with certain properties. And you, as people who are even less happy maybe with math, maybe you love mathy things. But anyway, maybe if it makes you nervous, just think about the kind of structure. And I assert if you ask these kinds of questions, you can be a good critical user of security and privacy and cryptography techniques. So the question is, think about what is the problem it was designed to solve? What exactly are the inputs and outputs? What are the assumptions that are being made about who knows what and when? What are the assumptions about how people will attack this? And then another good question is, how confident are we that this method works? Sometimes it's a mathematical proof that this method works. For example, there's a thing called a one-time pad. The Allies used one-time pads when they ran spies into the Nazi-occupied Europe. The one-time pad is mathematically provably unbreakable. So next time you go to a movie and there's some hacker and he says, "Oh, I'll break this," there's nothing that cannot be broken with a sufficiently smart hacker. Bullshit. I have a mathematical proof that there's at least one technique which cannot be broken. Anyway, and then there's also the issue of how about are there some algorithms for which there's kind of an engineering thing? So it turns out here that the digital signature is based on something called RSA. There's a known attack against RSA that doesn't work with regular computers. There's these fancy things called quantum computers. That used to be science fiction. Quantum computers are probably about 25 years out now. So any signature or anything you encrypt with the RSA public key crypto system, if the NSA stores it in that huge facility they have outside of Salt Lake City, 25 years from now, when they turn on their big general-purpose quantum computer, they're going to read all your secrets. So don't send anything with RSA if you don't want the NSA to see it 25 years from now. Anyway, and then also there's PKI. Okay, so that's, I don't want to, let's see, so the last thing I have to say, so I want to say something about cryptographic hash functions. This is another piece of blockchain. Cryptographic hash function, this thing takes arbitrary large inputs, crunches them up. It's a black art. You just mix this bit with that bit, you toss it's all sorts of random stuff with bits. And it takes, no matter how big the input is, it puts output of a certain fixed size. So the most commonly we use one in the world now is called SHA-256. It produces an output which is 256 bits. No matter how many megabytes of input you have, it'll list an output of 256 bits. And it has this weird property that if I tell you what the output is, it's very hard for you to predict what the input was. And furthermore, if I tell you, here's one input that gives that output, for you to get a second input that has the same output, there are an infinite number of inputs that have the same output, by the way, because of something in mathematics called the pigeonhole principle. finding that second input that gives you the same output is astronomically difficult. And when we say astronomically, it means like you could use every computer on planet Earth and run it for as long as the universe has existed, and your chance of finding it would still be negligibly small. Right? These are really... so basically it's a blender. It stirs together all the bits and produces a little pellet of output. And that pellet smells very distinctively like the input, but sort of in an unpredictable way. What do you use this for? Well, suppose I send you a big data file, and I spend multi-megabytes and send it over to some network, and I have a lousy home network, and you say, well, did it come through uncorrupted? I say, well, hash the damn thing, and then read me those 256 bits. And I'll hash it on my side, and we'll compare our 256 bits. The chances of them being distinct inputs with the same hash is about 1 over the number of particles in the universe. So that's a good way of checking. The other thing you can do is you can make things called immutable chains. Suppose I have a lot of data and I'm coming in chunks, a chain of sequential records. And every time I put in a record, I put in that new record, I attach to it the hash of the previous block. And then the next block has the hash of that block, which in it had the hash of the previous block, so there's a chain here of hashes inside each other. Now suppose you have a copy of this and I have a copy of this, and you want to cheat. You go back to one of the very old blocks and you change it. And I say, I think you cheated. What I do is I run through, as long as we agree about what the initial block was, which in the Bitcoin world is called the Genesis block. And we agree what the Genesis block is, we start hashing that, and we look at what the next thing is each time. And we run down the chain, we check that the hashes all agree. And because of this second pre-image resistance problem, basically it's impossible to cheat on a hash chain. You can't break them, they're unchangeable. Once you agree what the current thing is, you can check if it's ever been changed. They're immutable. All right. Also, hash functions can be used to slow someone down. Suppose I said, to find two things that have the same hash value, you basically have to run for the length of the universe. Suppose I give up on that. I say, you take this piece of data, and I want you to add a number at the end of the data and hash the whole thing, and I want the output to be not some specific thing, but I want the output to have, the last few bits of the output should all be zeros. Maybe 6 bits of zeros, and all the other 250 bits can be whatever the hell they want to be. You keep trying things, and you can do a lot. We can predict how much work you're likely to have to do before you can get 6 bits of zeros. If I want you to do even more work, I say give me 7 bits of zeros. It'll take you twice as long to get 7 bits of zeros. So I can control how much work you have to do by giving you a chunk of data and saying, please add to this some more data, which when I hash the whole thing, there are 7 bits of zeros at the end of that. And as long as we all agree how much, I can slow people down all over the world by saying, this is the task you have to do. Go out there and compute until you have a certain number of zeros. And that's why the country of Austria is using all its power to do Bitcoin, because part of the Bitcoin protocol is everyone has to make a lot of zeros and some hashes. So there are factory buildings in Shenzhen filled with special purpose processors that just compute SHA-256s 24/7. And they try to find a SHA-256 which attached to the current blockchain, Bitcoin proposed block of transactions has 8 bits of zeros at the end. And there's so many processes trying to do this thing that's what it slows everyone down, and it uses a lot of power. Why do we want to slow people down? We want to slow people down because of consensus. We could say we want to have consensus members agreeing. So how about if we want to agree, what's the next valid block of transactions for this cryptocurrency, secret currency on the network? We'll say the next valid block, I have a block of transactions, I want them to authorize Jonathan Rees has another block. We all have different blocks. We're trying to get them onto the globally recognized network. So I'm going to try and add a piece of data to the end. When I hash the whole thing, I have some number of zeros on the end. And the amount of zeros I have to get is controlled by a globally agreed upon number, so that this happens once every 10 minutes in the whole world. And that way, there's not likely to be 2 people who get the thing at exactly the same time. So probably Jonathan Rees beat me to it by a couple of seconds. And then his chain starts to grow. He transmits to the rest of the world, I got it. If I come in a few seconds later and I get it, then I transmit. But he's got other people who are already growing his chain. People are catching up growing my chain. Whichever chain starts to be longer, everyone migrates to that chain. So that's how we agree globally what the chain is. Whoever wins this competition goes that way. So that's why it consumes so much power, but it's a way of agreeing globally. And it has to be slow. Because if everyone was succeeding really, really quickly, we'd have lots of chains growing simultaneously. We want it to be slow. So that's the way the blockchain works. Too many words on this. So the things to notice about this, we have a hash chain. These are public records. Everyone has agreed about them, so it's public data. It's in a hash chain, so it's immutable. We need a PKI because people submit things into this thing. They typically digitally sign the transactions they propose to happen on this public blockchain. And furthermore, the distributed consensus program avoids putting its trust into any particular party. That's a weird assumption from money. I mean, what happens if I give you $100 and you promise to do something for me, and then you don't do it? I call the police. We both there's a trusted third party who's got guns. It's the government, right? And they enforce financial transactions. It's weird that we want to avoid bringing in the power that makes financial transactions work. That's what. So really, the people who like Bitcoin, they don't trust. They so much do not trust with the government. They want to be able to have some way of having transactions with people that do not require any external power to enforce our financial arrangements. The algorithms should do it, not people, not the algorithms. That's they don't trust anyone. So, in summary, blockchains they're public, they're immutable, they rely on a robust PKI, and they avoid trusted third parties. So this is where we come back to. So what people propose blockchains and all sorts of, they propose it for money. I think that's bullshit. I mean, we have to trust the government. Financial transactions work because someone's going to enforce them, right? So if we're going to trust the government, we might as well have them, instead of having this crazy thing with computation, why don't I just submit my transactions to the government, and whichever block of transactions gets to their inbox first is the one that wins. You don't have any computation to see which is the correct sequence of transactions. It's just whoever gets the TTP first wins. So I don't understand financial uses. Educational, so there's a big thing, a bunch of universities now are talking about putting their student credentials on the blockchain. Why would you do that? I mean, it's incredible. I mean, MIT is talking about doing this. There are places where there are smart people who are talking about, I totally do not understand. You know, there is a natural trusted third party for MIT certificates. MIT trusts themselves, right? So what they could do is when you walk across the stage, and they hand you your diploma, actually usually they hand you an empty envelope and until they check your library fines. They can hand you also a thumb drive. And on this thumb drive would be a digital copy of your transcript, digitally signed by MIT's private key. We have a robust PKI, which we need to have to make the blockchain work anyway. That key is trustable as belonging to MIT, and that's so that now if I ever want to prove to a potential employer or a graduate school that I have that degree from MIT, I just email them the thing, they go to MIT, they get their public key, they do that checking of the signature, and they know it's a valid. What's the point of putting on a public blockchain? It's kind of immutable already because once MIT has signed it, they can't unsign it. I have that document on my thumb drive. They can't take away their signature. Walmart made a big splash about 2 years ago. They were putting their supply chain on the blockchain. Again, I don't understand that. Why don't they trust themselves? Why don't they say to every single person who's supplying groceries and meats and things to Walmart, you know, you send me your data. I will check and see if I believe it, and then I will put it in my database. And there we go. Now I know where that grocery came from. How does putting on a public blockchain? I live in Colorado. In Colorado, we have marijuana, legal marijuana. There's a whole discussion about putting marijuana producers will put records of their marijuana productions on the blockchain. Maybe because the DEA will come in and hit you if the federal DEA doesn't like marijuana yet. But there's a state agency that's in charge of marijuana. They trust themselves. Why don't the recognized state producers, you have to get a license to be a producer. The state recognized producers will just email their records to the state office. So whenever there's a natural trusted third party, blockchains make no sense. The other thing that blockchains don't make any sense is if there isn't a good, robust PKI, right? The association between your identity and what the things, your transactions you put on the blockchain is through your PKI. So I've heard people say, suppose MIT went out of business, and the president's office, his furniture, including his computer, was for sale on the sidewalk out in Cambridge, and somebody bought his PC, and the MIT private key was there on the hard drive. So then suddenly, someone could start issuing new MIT certificates, and when I email my digitally signed MIT, I don't have a diploma at MIT, my MIT diploma to a potential employer, they would say, well, maybe you signed it after this went public. So the whole blockchain thing could be because sometimes universities go out of business. Okay, what about their accrediting organization? You could have their accrediting organization issue the signature. So we think the accrediting organization is going to go out of business too? How about the federal government? We're on the 5th republic in France. Maybe every time a republic changes, they lose their private key. I don't know. It seems insane to me. Anyway, so the moral of this whole story is there's a very cool thing called asymmetric crypto, which allows digital signatures, and there's a very cool thing called cryptographic hash functions. Those are very nice things. I don't really know how they would be useful in the digital humanities. They might be, but they're really useful for life on the internet. People should understand this. We're trying to teach our students digital literacy. Students should know a little bit about how this works. They should, for example, they should know that keeping the secrecy of your secret key. If you make up, I have sometimes emails with my students, and I say, I will only discuss grades with you if you encrypt your email before you send it to me. And they say, oh fuck, and then they go and they learn how to do it, and then they know how to do public key and crypto, which I think is a valuable lesson that they've learned. And we want them to know that. We want them to know that your identity rests in keeping that secret key private. There have been lots of stolen Bitcoin. The stolen Bitcoins have all become someone hacked into someone else's computer and stole their secret key, and then issued new transactions to the little Bitcoin network, which give those coins to the person who stole the private key. Right. So, knowing this stuff is very useful. I also say that even though this crypto and this security stuff, all this is all kind of very mathy, and that's a little bit intimidating to a lot of people. Those general kind of critical thinking skills that if you're a historian, if whatever your discipline is, you have critical thinking skills, and those same things work perfectly well. And don't tune out just because I wrote some Greek letters, right? There's the same kind of question. Ask exactly what the algorithm intends to do. Who knows what when for this to work? And what are the assumptions that specialized community believes, like this is going to break the minute we have quantum computers, or this is going to break if we can get angels to dance on the head of a pin. There'll be some assumptions that people will know, and those will be clearly stated somewhere. Ask those kind of questions about things. Don't give up. And people can reason about these things even without knowing the details. And so I really think I think this is something we should also teach our students, right? I mean, this thing I do, which my students find annoying, that they want to discuss their grades with me by email. They've got to learn how to use public key crypto. It's worth it. It takes them 5 minutes. If you can master the settings in Snapchat, you can master you can master public key crypto. And I think we should do that more often as a way of giving people these basics and giving our students these basic skills, because it's going to serve. It's going to be like now they go out on the internet and they understand. They understand a little more about what's going on and what's at risk in some of these circumstances. And all these slides are on my website under a Creative Commons license, and I even made a QR code which gets you right to my website if you like. I'm very proud of that QR code.
You have 25 minutes?
I have 20. I went too fast. Do you want to go back and do the math again? Anyway, let's some questions I can answer about how any of this stuff works. I went super fast because I was afraid I was going way behind.
What do you feel are some practical applications for things like blockchain, given that we're talking about this, and the lowest common denominator is really a 4 to 6 digit pin on somebody's cell phone, which is now obfuscated by facial recognition. So as long as I don't shoot you in the face and I gain access to your cell phone. So it's a little bit like learning analytics, right? I haven't seen a single case where I think learning analytics really does anyone any good. There's a really smart guy named David Gerard, who's a UK journalist who's written a book called The Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, which is really worth reading. And he also has a blog where he keeps it up to date all the time. And he keeps to, every once in a while he does a sort of revisits kind of all of the published use cases for blockchains. And there's not a single one that I think actually makes sense if you look hard at it. I mean, that's, so here I am crying emperor's new clothes. I mean, lots of, there are multi-million-dollar investments being made in this. So I could easily be wrong, but just because there's multi-million-dollar investments in it doesn't make me believe that the critical thinking analysis is wrong. I just think there's no real use case. I mean, the closest I've ever seen to you. So the thing we have to find a scenario where there is no natural trusted third party, because if there's a trusted third party, there's much more efficient ways of doing these things. Basically, just public key crypto does everything that the fancy blockchains do. So there's only one case I think I've heard of where which is Creative Commons, that if you wanted to, suppose you want to have sort of a registry of Creative Commons licensed materials. You could take every work that you create, you could hash it, you could put the hash onto some blockchain. And
the Creative Commons is international. You don't really, for it to move forward it doesn't really make anyone any money. That's part of the idea. And so you don't want to rely on some profit-making organization. The government doesn't really want to run this. It's sort of doing an end run around copyright law. So this is a case where maybe the community would get together. The community would do that computation like all those server farms in Shenzhen. The community would do it, but you choose a better algorithm to do the consensus so you don't lose that much power. But the community would get together to advance the state of this blockchain, and there would be an official registry of Creative Commons licensed works. I think the devil's in the details. I think that actually doesn't work, because if someone takes a work and changes a single bit on it, touches it so that the last looked at date and then the metadata of the Word file is different, the hash is going to be completely different. So it looks like it's in the document. Even though it's from the point of view of copyright law, it's the same document, it looks completely different. The other thing is, once you have these big, so suppose someone takes some child porn and hashes it and puts it on your blockchain, the whole blockchain might then be in violation of child pornography distribution laws at that point. So I don't know that, I can't think of a single case where I think it really makes sense. It's an extreme view, but I sometimes go, there are now all these like you had their webinars inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle both had webinars in the last year about how this is going to totally transform education. And I listened on the website, and there's these online Q&As, and at the end I was like, can I ask a question? I ask a question, and then they can't answer your questions. It's an Emperor's New Cloak. Well, that's a good point, but I think we really agree, but the technical issue I want to discuss with you right now. It's like, no, we don't agree. It's very weird. I wrote a piece, Inside Higher Ed had one of these apocalyptic pieces about a year ago saying, blockchain could change all of education. And I wrote a response piece called Blockchain Pixie Dust. I bought the website blockchainpixiedust.com and put my piece up there. But anyway, so I'm kind of a skeptic. Did you have a question?
How can I verify that it was your website? What I don't understand with this is who the fuck cares about any of these? I mean, I go to BYU and they're really big into this stuff. And
right. Yes, they really are.
And I
yes.
think the one piece where it is at least of interest to me is around identity and who you are. So
well, I just heard it.
You can reframe everything to be around the individual that you can verify it was you.
Right.
Because the child porn thing is an easy use case. Someone could spoof a signature and it looks like the file came from you.
Well, they have to have your private key to fake your signature, right? That's pretty robust. The thing about the BYU example is the BYU has an ultimate authority. It's the Mormon Church. Right? So there's an authority that everyone in the BYU community believes in. It's the Mormon Church. So the Mormon Church had an IT department. They would be the trusted third party outside.
They do have an IT department.
So, well, they probably do. But there's a lot of people talk about. I think it appeals to people because it's highly decentralized. And I gotta say, I love decentralized. I use only Linux, and I don't like centralized things, and I don't like, refuse. I try to get completely off Google. But this is a case where the decentralization just for the purpose of decentralizing, and then making a lot of money selling it to some university. It's going to have an identity side. Service seems to me to make no sense.
I feel like it's the natural evolution of IT that doesn't have a humanities focus to ground it in any way. My straw man in this discussion was people who don't want to learn the technical side of crypto, and your straw man is the technical crypto people who don't want to learn about the world and make up these silly systems. I agree with you. There's a lot of that going on too. To do this, then then the sun powering all of Earth. You'd have to consolidate all electricity consumption on Earth to just switch the financial systems to it.
Yeah, that's why my point about critical thinking, right? Think clearly about what. So another use case that sounds really. There's this guy Ted Tapscott, who's a Canadian consultant who wrote a book about. He and his son wrote a book about how amazing blockchain is going to be, and he has a TED talk about it, which has had 1.4 million views and something. And one of the use cases he says is there are all these guest workers, young people from the Philippines go to some place in the global north and make a lot of money. They send it back home. By Western Union. Western Union takes something like 10%, right? They're sucking off billions of dollars and if there was some way to get money across borders more quickly, but that's a very specific problem. Let's, how about someone open an international wire transfer company that charges less than 10%?
just free market the hell out of them and make a better service that's cheaper. There are lots of other solutions to that particular problem. I don't see how that, I don't really see how it makes. I think you make a good point. A lot of the technical people we got really excited. They got really excited. They have this decentralization thing, and everyone knows that centralized things are bad. And I guess instinctively I agree with that, but I think in lots of the actual cases they want to use that, it's not.
It's awesome. It's the next Easter Island. It's just a
Anyway, yes, Laura.
I'm new to this. I want to ask about this PKI thing.
Yeah.
Because you said
Yes.
the asymmetric encryption uses it, and so does the Bitcoin.
Right.
Is that like VeriSign? Is that what?
So yes, so exactly. So the thing I didn't mention. So there's this man-in-the-middle attack, and how do I make sure that I really have Jeff Bezos's public key so I can send my credit card? So the answer is So suppose I look on their website and there's a little piece that says this is the public key you can use to communicate with Amazon and send data like your credit card securely to them. That piece of data is itself signed by some more higher authority key. And that key is somewhere on some other site, which is so there is finally a root key. And where does that root key come from? Every time you buy Microsoft Windows, it comes with the root key pre-installed. And people in Linux world, you can get your hands on the root key, and there are thousands of copies all over the world. No one's going to be able to be in the middle of it because there's just so many copies on so many different websites you couldn't stop it. So the root keys are well distributed, and then everything is, you get a copy of a key that you want because it's signed by the root key, and then that key signs another key, and then finally we can check that Bezos's key is what it says it is. So that whole structure of PKI, the PKI thing is about individuals, right? So my idea is when everyone's born, the government should issue them a really strong public key, private key pair. And I don't know, tattoo it on the inside of their cheek or something. And then years later, when they want to do communications, you can be sure that that was really them. But, at the moment, every time I want to, when I'm teaching this stuff, I generate new keys, and then I post in some public service that says, this is Jonathan Poritz's key, but without a sort of robust way of checking that really is my key. There's another thing, if you really believe it, if you really don't like centralized servers, the thing that all the crypto hackers do, where they're called key signing parties, where you make yourself a key, and then you meet someone, and you have a sort of protocol established. He's like, I want to see your passport. I know you, I've met you lots of times, but look, if I'm going to sign your key, I want to see your passport. And you show me your passport, and you bring a thumb drive with your key, and I have another thumb drive with my key, and we plug them in, and I sign your key. And then anytime you go and you want to send an email to Jonathan Rees, or he wants to send an email to you, he wants to know that your public key is what is actually yours. Since he knows me, we work together, he trusts my key, and then since I've signed your key, he will trust. So we can make a web of trust. As long as people are really, really careful about really only signing keys that they really, really believe. And the science fiction author Cory Doctorow, he runs some of these key signing. If he's visiting town, often he'll say, I'm going to be speaking at a Comic-Con, and there's going to be an hour I'll be signing people's keys. Bring your passport. And then you get Cory's signature on your key. I had a signature on a key of his for a while. I was really proud of it. But then I lost the private key. So it was no good to me anymore. Yes?
One of my coworkers has a sort of a favorite saying, SSL is all about trust.
Yeah. So SSL is another thing that uses these other kinds of crypto.
It's the key.
Right.
Keys, security. You have to trust somebody.
Yeah, and that's another thing I think, your comment about sort of it being like the technical people and the humanities people, and the humanities people have kind of taken the word trust and they've used it metaphorical meaning. Like, so this guy Tapscott from Canada has this whole, this is going to be the web of trust, and they go, there's a company in the Crypto Valley outside in Switzerland called Ethereum. They have the second most popular cryptocurrency. Ethereum doesn't just have transactions on their blockchain, they have little programs in a specialized language. And they call them smart contracts. And you're only going to get your money when this program runs and decides you have filled your half of the contract, and then it will issue you and then it will transfer the Ethereum currency to you. Sounds great. How does that program know that you delivered, the painting that you promised you were going to deliver to the person who's going to pay you the Ethereum? There's still the connection between the real world and the computers, and as long as you're going to lie when you're talking to the computer, smart contract can be as smart as it wants to be. It's never going to know what's happening in the real world. So, a lot of people in this field use the word trust in a kind of metaphorical way that is really sort of scary to me.
Well, I don't know, this might be the dumbest question of the hour, but
So when I think about a big city in China that we've never heard of before, but is one of the forward-leaning exemplars of what surveillance at every level can be. So how is blockchain allowing the government to be able to create a seamless net over its citizens, and how can it also be used by its citizens to come up with another way of communicating with each other?
I think you're right, but these issues are related, but it's not blockchains. It's if the citizens knew strong crypto. There are publicly discussed, I have software running on my laptop that pretty much the entire academic cryptographic community thinks that not even any government on planet Earth can crack, right? So what I'm saying is that, if citizens could control the software on their machines, they wouldn't use a blockchain. They would use these things, these fundamental primitive pieces like digital signatures and encryption to hide their traffic from government surveillance. So that's another thing. If you want to use crypto as a hedge against surveillance, you need to understand a little bit of crypto, but there's really strong crypto now. This is why it's laughable. The government's always saying we'll make a law that you have to have a backdoor in all of your crypto. I mean, a backdoor is just a door that you don't usually use, right? I mean, why would that be? That's not a thing. The backdoor crypto is not a thing, and the Congress seems to think it's a thing. But I think that I don't know of. I haven't seen anyone say that they're using the blockchain to surveil their people. And I probably have seen people say, well, we use blockchain to avoid surveillance. But what they really mean when they say that is when you use the same primitives that are put together to make blockchains, these kind of encryption techniques to escape. Okay. The government could be really, really intrusive. They could say every bit on the network has to be running on one of our protocols, and if we see any gibberish that goes by, that might be encrypted things that we would never be able to break, then we will come down on you with those secret police. Then what you would do, you would have a lot of people, they would start emailing each other large image files. Right? I would be constantly emailing you copies of the Mona Lisa, right? And the files would all be slightly different. I would have hidden my messages in the bits of them. There's a thing called steganography for hiding messages inside large files, right? So there are good crypto techniques for avoiding surveillance. I don't know, and we don't want the government to know more than its citizens, but I don't think blockchain is really going to be the thing that's going to protect us. That's good. People talk about it all the time. It's a good question. Anyway, I don't know what that really has to do with the subject of this conference, but learn some crypto and teach your students, I guess, is the bottom line. Also, don't come on, use critical thinking about this stuff, right? It's just because it's felt so simple doesn't mean it's immune to critical thinking. That's my message. All right.